Hi, I'm just with Gerald Pollack. We are wanting to explore Gerald's work on water memory and his discovery of the fourth phase of water, which is a world-changing position on our understanding as people on the power and consciousness of water. So I just hoped that, Gerald, you could introduce yourself with a little context of how you became one of the world's leading scientists, if not the world's leading scientist on water.
Well, kind of you to think that. I appreciate that. For many years, we were studying muscles. We were studying how muscles contract at the molecular level. And the going theory involved the proteins inside the muscle, which would interact with one another to produce force and motion. It occurred to me that the theory of muscle was missing the most abundant component of the muscle, and that is water. You know, muscles contain 2/3 water by volume, as do most tissues in your body. And how could it be that the largest component of the muscle had nothing to do with the function of the muscle? You know, if you convert that 2/3 volume into the number of molecules, it turns out, if you do the arithmetic, that if you line up all the molecules in the muscle one by one and start counting, more than 99 out of 100 are water molecules. And it seemed to me to be absurd to think that you could ignore the water, you could ignore 99% of the molecules and figure out how the muscle contracts. So that's how I entered the field of water. And I had also known about the pioneering work of one Gilbert Ling. He's a Chinese American. He came to the US. And he was among the first 3 people chosen to come from China after World War II. They picked the most promising scientists in all of China. One of them went on to win the Nobel Prize, Yang, in physics. And they all thought that Gilbert Ling was probably the smartest of all 3. And Gilbert went on to do his work, and he wrote many books. He's now 99. Maybe he's crossed the threshold to 100. I'm not sure.
Years old.
Pardon?
He's 99 years old.
At least 99. He may be 100. He was born in 1919. I don't know what month of 1919, but anyway, he's getting on in years. And he's written, I think by now, 6 or 7 books. And the main theme in his books is that inside our body, especially inside ourselves, that the water is not like water in a glass. The water molecules are different. They're actually lined up. They're ordered. And he would refer to these as structured water. So that's how we got started. I wrote a book in 2001. It was called Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. And what I was trying to do in that book was to make known to the general public, especially the lay public, the import of what Gilbert Ling has done. And as I started writing it, I sort of went beyond what Gilbert had done, and I was able to adduce evidence that the water, or actually the structure of the water, was absolutely critical to every major function inside the body. Every major cellular function was actually a transition between this structured water and ordinary water that was a trigger to many things that happen inside your body, many of the most fundamental processes.
Which means that water is pure intelligence, that the frequency and structure of water is delicately formed to power everything within our body.
I think it is, but that part wasn't exactly clear at the time. We found later that it was. I mean, having written the book, of course, you can imagine we were quite interested in doing experiments to find out more about this seemingly unique feature of muscle. And we started experiments, and as we began doing experiments, we learned so much about the water, and particularly about the memory of water, which I will get to in a moment. But let me just maybe explain what I found, what we found. I shouldn't say I, it's actually mostly the students in my laboratory. and so we found that if you have a substance and surrounded by water, and we're talking about substances that are so-called hydrophilic, that means they love water. It means if you were to drop a droplet of water on a hydrophilic surface, it would spread out instead of beating up as it does on Teflon. So we found that when the water meets most, not all, of these hydrophilic surfaces, it undergoes an enormous change. The water molecules change from their ordinary disordered state, which is like in a glass of water, and they undergo a structural change to an ordered structure, much like Gilbert Ling has suggested, but I think the structure differs. And that structural change occurs not just in the few molecules that meet the surface, but in many, many, up to millions, actually, literally millions of molecular layers, starting from that hydrophilic surface to way out. And
what would you call the hydrophilic surface for the average person? What could they consider that to be?
Hydrophilic means water loving, and that actually constitutes most surfaces. Most are that way. So, for example, gels are like that, and many polymers are like that, and biological tissues are like that. And all you need to do to find out is just take your droplet of water, drop it, and see if it spreads out. If it spreads out, it's hydrophilic. It loves, the surface loves the water. It wants to get in contact with the water as much as possible.
So arguably a riverbed would be hydrophilic?
What? Sorry? A riverbed? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
would assume that a riverbed would most love water in the world more than anything else.
Yes, a riverbed would be, or the materials on the bed would be mostly hydrophilic for sure. And the substances that may be dissolved in the water are also many of them are hydrophilic. If they're dissolved in the water or suspended in the water, it means that they're hydrophilic. Otherwise, they would just precipitate out. Now, this structure has many interesting features. And one of the features is that it's not neutral like water; it's charged, and typically, it's negatively charged. And it turns out that as it acquires negative charge, the water beyond acquires equal and opposite positive charge. So it's like a battery where you have this water, which we call fourth phase, or we also call it exclusion zone, because it's a zone of ordered water, and it's like a crystal. And ordered molecules, as in ice, for example, excludes everything. It pushes all the junk out as it forms. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a pure crystal.
So could you be saying that in a glass of water, the water has no purpose? It's got no life form to engage with, to keep alive, to turn into that fourth phase, to do its job at powering that living cell, for example.
It has lots of energy. It has potential energy. That separation of charge that we talked about is potential energy. And this potential energy comes from the environment. It comes from light. This was a surprise for us. But, in order to create order from disorder, you need energy. And the energy we found in experiments comes from light. It comes particularly from infrared light. And most people don't really have an inkling where to get infrared light. You look in the toaster and you see the glowing coils and you think, oh, it's hot, it's infrared light. But actually infrared light comes from everywhere. If you were to, for example, if I were to pull out my ordinary camera and we turn off all the lights, I'd see nothing. The camera would see nothing. But if I pulled out my infrared camera, I'd get beautiful images of you, your hair, the painting in your background and everything, because everything is generating infrared. It's free. It's free for the take there. And that's what builds structure. So there's structure all around us, and certainly structure in rivers. So the structure is really important because it's fundamentally different from ordinary water. You think of ordinary water, and in ordinary water, the molecules are bouncing around a huge number of times per second, and their molecules are randomly oriented. And you can never imagine a structure like that storing any kind of information.
No.
But it's different when you're dealing with this kind of, I said fourth phase water, also EZ or exclusion zone water, because it tends to exclude. Okay, this kind of water.
To summarize that would be if the water's sitting in a glass, it's a whole lot of random molecules just bouncing around. As soon as it goes into the body, into cells, it becomes very ordered and structured. And the same would apply arguably when it goes into a riverbed and it has purpose to provide life to a living ecosystem. It would become ordered and structured.
Totally. As soon as it encounters any hydrophilic, most hydrophilic surfaces, it undergoes this transformation into something ordered.
And so then if you took the water out of the body, or took out of the living organism, took the water out of the stream and put it in a test tube, arguably it would lose its purpose to be structured and it would go back to bouncing around as just a whole lot of random molecules.
It's not so clear that that's the case, because we've looked at some waters we've looked at some waters that were prepared. You know, many people are preparing different kinds of waters because they're worried about the pollution of our ordinary water sources, and they claim that it may have health benefits. And in some cases, I think there's evidence that it could. But we got some water from one supplier who touted this water as being able to reverse irreversible kidney pathology. At first, when he told me that on the telephone, I said, I don't believe you. Actually, I did. So he sent me some hospital records. And a colleague of mine went to interview all the patients who actually affirmed that, indeed, that they were cured by this special water. And we were curious to see if it contained structure. Yeah. And so he sent me a sample, and the sample sat on my desk for maybe 3 months before we got a chance to measure it. And we have an easy way to determine if it contains structure. And even after 3 months of sitting there, it contained a huge amount of structure. So I don't know if when water was produced, it may have had more or less or the same amount, but clearly after just sitting around for 3 months, it still contained structure.
So once it's restructured by hitting the hydrophilic surface, whether it's a body or a waterbed, arguably it maintains that structure for a long period of time.
It can. We haven't done enough experiments for me to say with certainty that this will last indefinitely, but it might.
And obviously, if it then went into another surface, it could completely restructure again. I watched a video where you once said that even when the water hits the hand, it completely restructures its form.
Well, it might get information. I think this is what I was trying to say. See, our experiments have led to a concept of this structure, and we think the structure is a generic structure that exists, and the generic kind of structure which can be informed. The generic structure is a series of sheets, and each sheet is a honeycomb consisting of oxygen and hydrogen, which exist in a hexagonal form. And so these sheets will pile up. So here's the hydrophilic surface down here, and you have one sheet, the next sheet, and so on. And these will keep building for many, many, many layers. That's the generic structure. However, what we've also found is that the generic structure can be impacted by information. And you don't need a whole lot of information to do it. We and many others, also surprising number of people, have been studying information in water. And we think that the storage of information actually occurs in the EZ water, not in the ordinary bulk water, because the molecules are bouncing around randomly. And
the EZ water is structured fourth phase water. You call it EZ as a section. Yeah.
Right.
So then if you're saying that the water is hitting a surface or a substance and gaining information and then restructuring and changing form, then your work has confirmed that water is a form of intelligence, because the only way you process information and change is surely by a sort of consciousness.
Well, yeah, I think that's the case, and a large number of scientists are looking into this. There's even, for example, Professor Luc Montagnier,
yes.
His name, he won a Nobel Prize, and he started studying information in water.
Yes.
And he that this can be used therapeutically if you apply the right information. Of course, if you apply the wrong information, then it can be destructive. And
I was reading the history of Jean Benveniste's work and Luke taking that over, and I noticed that it also it related to a Dutch scientist's work where the individual person is affecting individual droplets of water differently. So in the experiments that worked or didn't work in the early days of water memory, it mattered which person did the experiment. So when the US Defense Force did some experiments based on John Benveniste's work, it failed. But when other scientists did it, it worked. So arguably the water is consciousness to the point of responding to perhaps high energy people and not high energy people. We don't know. This is the new frontier, and what you've just said.
Totally so. You know, when I visited Jacques Benveniste's laboratory, the late Jacques Benveniste, his laboratory, before he came, he showed up an hour late, which was fine because I had a nice conversation with his people. And one of the technicians was telling me that that they had a student, and this student didn't, quote, believe any of this stuff that was going on. And every time she came into the room, they tried the experiments, and the experiments didn't work. They failed. And every time she left the room, they succeeded. Then they asked her to do the experiment, and they never succeeded. And, he told me, this is not the stuff you can publish in a journal, because all science is supposed to be completely objective, and it doesn't matter who does it. And, it can be repeated by anybody, and you should get the same result. If, and there are a lot of ifs, and if consciousness, if your thoughts and such impact the water, and now there's a lot of evidence. We organize each year the annual conference on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water. Each year, now it's in Bulgaria. It started in Vermont, in U.S., and each time it's starting in 1 week from now, exactly. We get 2, 3, 4, 5 people who have presentations on information and memory in water. It's a very subtle thing, which makes it difficult to study, but it's there. There's no doubt, because so many people have confirmed this. So there's no doubt. The problem is that, the world out there, the scientists who have been brought up on like the rest of us, myself included, conventional thinking about mechanistic science, materialist science, it's hard for people like that to be open to the the prospect that there may be subtle effects like information coming from people. There's a guy, I don't know if you know about him. His name is William Bankston, and his story is so interesting. It has to do with cancer and curing cancer, and he does this with his hands. So the mice are about this?
Well, I know a lot about bioenergy healing, which you can cure and change form and state with your hands.
This is remarkable because he started on humans, of course, and he does it now on mostly on mice in collaboration with people who use a standard mouse model. And the mouse model is such that you inject tumor material, and the mouse gets a tumor, and it grows and grows, and within 20 days or so, 25 days, it squeezes out all the other organs, and the mouse dies. And so what he does, he has a technique that he's developed. He puts the mice with the tumors, maybe after, 10 days or so, into a cage, and the cage is sitting on his lap, and he puts his hands around it, and he runs through a menu in his mind, a menu of 20 pleasant experiences that he could imagine, not experiences that he's had. And these would be images that represent each experience. And he tries to feel the experience. He runs through these, a list of 20. He cycles through them again and again. And the cure rate among these mice is very close to 100%. And then it's really a cure because the tumor disappears. And then if you inject the tumor material again, no tumor, the mouse is immune to the tumor. The problem that he's facing right now is if he's sitting in one corner of the room with the cage on his lap, and puts his hands around the mice,
Yeah.
they'll get cured. But in the other corner of the room, there are some other mice, and they get cured too. So this information that is somehow coming from him, it's
Okay.
over. Yeah, it's a substantial distance. Of
Wow. So
course, which
so
makes
it's like the telepathy, or what we they're using sort of like radio frequency signals or
yeah,
electric.
but they don't know. It's apparently not a radio frequency signal. They don't know what the signal is, and this is part of the challenge to figure out what the signal is. Many people who are doing experiments like this report that that it seems to be not an ordinary electromagnetic signal, because ordinary electromagnetic signals lose their intensity over distance, and so you can't imagine something like this to work over half the world. From he's in New York and you're in New Zealand, and it's quite a distance. But another researcher, a guy named Kernbach, who it reported last year and this year too. So he has a system of looking at water and measuring the properties of water. It's called impedance spectroscopy. It's a fancy name. All it means is that he's putting two electrodes. Impedance, it's like resistance. Spectroscopy. So spectroscopy means you're looking at different frequencies, and he can tell so much about the characteristics of the water. So he's got water sitting in his laboratory, and the water, and he measures using this instrument. He measures the properties of the water, and the properties are rather stable. Then he arranges with someone as far as 10,000 kilometers from his laboratory, and I think it might have been New Zealand, I can't remember, someone to focus their attention on the water in his laboratory. Yeah. And he showed the result afterward, and the impedance spectrograph is completely different after the person focused attention. So this borders on unbelievable. Sorry?
This is a theory that I have also, a belief that I have also, which is not based in science, it's more instinctive. So it is my opinion that, for example, if all of your water is poisoned, if people concentrate their energy on it in the way of form of prayer or meditation or a high frequency direction of energy, then they have the capability to actually change the form of that water and heal that water, or
I've seen no evidence on that, but it's entirely plausible, because this kind of it's sort of like a digital computer memory. You put different information in and you change it. The basic structure of the memory is fixed, but the information you put in creates changes. And the water, the EZ water, fourth phase water, should behave in that way. So that you've got the generic structure, and if you put certain information in, that information is in the water, and this water is in your body.
And how delicate is that structure? For example, how do you think, obviously I've got legal cases with the International Criminal Court and the New Zealand Court of Appeal on the poisoning of water, the mass poisoning of water that's currently occurring in New Zealand. And so when you put one of the world's most lethal torture poisons or reproductive toxins in water, how does that affect the delicacy of the easy structured water, which is in a riverbed and arguably a hydrophilic surface? So it's
well, yeah. So I don't know anybody who has actually carried out that particular experiment, but my guess, based on my experience, is that the poison will impart information into the water, and that information is there. It may stay there indefinitely. It might be that new information can override that information. I'm not sure. This is completely open. However, I must say that this is an experiment that could have lethal consequences around the world. I wouldn't want to be the one who would argue that you put poison in the water and of course it will get diluted and such, and no trace of it, because there's now lots of information about homeopathic preparations, which is kind of similar. You take a substance and you mix it with water and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it. And in theory, you should be getting rid of the original substance. But it seems that there's clear evidence that, although controversial, clear evidence that these homeopathic preparations actually work. And it's not just a placebo effect, because it works in animals. I know I know veterinary homeopaths, and they're very popular. The horses come all the time, and they get cured, and so
Yeah.
their owners take them back. So dilution doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting rid of the information.
Yeah, exactly. And the specific poison being used in the New Zealand water system, well, there's many. There's Brodifacoum, monofluoroacetate are the two main ones, and they're two different ones. But monofluoroacetate, it metabolizes. So the original substance disappears. You put it in the water. The original substance metabolizes, and the degradation product is the fluorocitrate molecule, which then mimics the citrate molecule to interfere with the Krebs cycle and effectively stop it transitioning light and energy into light and food into energy. So the cell dies or mutates, which starts to triggers the breakdown of the body. So how does that tie in with your work? Because obviously this metabolizes into the fluorocitrate molecule, and the science on this that does exist, and there's not a lot, but it says that the fluorocitrate molecule stays whole in the water. So then you've got this killer molecule whole in the water, metabolized, no longer the original poison, but the killer molecule of the poison as the result of the poison. And how is that going to affect the water in the context of your experiments?
Okay, well, I think I can't answer that question exactly because I have no experience with that particular molecule. But if it interrupts the Krebs cycle, that this is lethal. We've tried. Let me back up a step. So the easy or fourth phase water is the water that fills your cells. It's absolutely critical for function. If you don't have enough of it, your cells won't function. So for example, if you don't have enough in your nerve cells are not going to communicate information properly. It'll get distorted or wiped out and such. And we found that molecules that are generally known for millennia to be good for health, they build easy water. And we think that the reason that they're so effective for health is they build easy water in your cells, and therefore they hydrate you. They keep you well hydrated. We tried, so far, we tried only one poison, and we expected the poison to do the opposite, and exactly what it did. We tried glyphosate. I don't know if you got that in New Zealand.
But they spread it everywhere, all over us.
Oh yeah, well, terrible poison, hard to get rid of, hard to detox, and so many people are filled with it. So we tried it, and we found in our experiments that it diminished the amount of easy water, and so that makes sense because if it does the same in weeds or in you, it's going to have a negative effect on your health. And we found even in very low concentrations, it does this. And so it's kind of scary. And, we developed a hypothesis. This is hypothesis only. We don't know if it's true. We're planning to test it.
I'd say kind of scary is more best presented as terrifying because it's killing the main source of life, which keeps everything working and alive, right? If you're
well, I think you're more accurate than I am. Scientists tend to be a bit diffident and
conservative
in their statements and careful, but it's absolutely scary. To think about what this is doing. I'm going to Stephanie Seneff, a colleague at MIT, who's done a lot of studies of glyphosate and is terrified also about the effects of this stuff. Yeah. So is it really? But the hypothesis that I'm suggesting, and this is still speculation because I haven't tested it, that many of the poisons are poisons because they remove the water that's inside the cell. They dehydrate, and your cells won't function. If they're sufficiently dehydrated, they won't function, and if they don't function, you die. You get sick first, and then you die. So this is all very serious stuff.
Very serious. So I asked you, from your knowledge on water, and I want to say again, as really one of the world's leading scientists, if not the leading scientist on the quality of the qualities of water. If you put poison in the water supply, that is going to travel through into the town and city and the watersheds in the bush, and that travels through to the town and city water supplies and the agriculture water supplies. this will have an effect on the life force or the ability of easy water to keep the cells alive within both humans and livestock, correct?
From all we know, it seems accurate what you say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
it's
then
really wonderful.
if the message has been spread, alternatively, that the poison in the water dilutes and just disappears and it's harmless after that, would you consider that to be absolutely incorrect?
Yes, from everything we know, that's not correct because the water stores information.
Yeah.
That's the essence. It's not just the quantity that counts, it's the exposure. And once the water is exposed to that, or the easy water is exposed to it, we don't know what happens. There haven't been enough studies to show whether the stuff eventually dissipates out or whether it persists indefinitely.
Yeah.
It's not clear.
And well, we know that the poisonous molecule of that is a degradation product of monofluoroacetate, which is the fluorocitrate molecule. That's the killer that interrupts the Krebs cycle. That stays whole. And some scientists say potentially indefinitely. Others say it has sort of a half-life of 4 years, depending on the temperatures and the circumstance. But if there is a molecule that is the killer molecule that stays whole in the water, the killer molecule of the poison, and it stays whole in the water, then that is going to permanently restructure the water to an enhanced version of the frequency of that poison.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And even if the molecule is missing, if the water contains the structure of the molecule, that could be sufficient sufficient to cause the same harm that the molecule itself is imparting. So it's not just the molecule; it's the water that's actually exposed to the molecule.
Exactly. The water itself becomes a loaded gun of poison, arguably, once
you might put it that way. You might put it that way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot more research needs to go into this, but I'd worry about dumping poison in water for sure.
So if you were to take a precautionary approach, your advice to the New Zealand government or the New Zealand state or the New Zealand Crown or any of these people who are inflicting this in our water currently would be to stop until the world understands completely the properties of water consciousness, water memory, water intelligence, water fourth phase to energize every cell and muscle in the body.
Absolutely, because this is an experiment whose results could be irreversible. This is extremely important to put money into this kind of research to check these. Maybe this is slightly tangential, but scientists it's difficult for scientists to get money to do research into areas like this because they depart too much from conventionality.
And
so
I expect because Big Pharma only makes money if they're selling pills, and if we work out how to heal bodies by frequency and water, then no one's making money anymore and healthcare is free.
Well, you put your finger on it. Actually, you're right on. Absolutely true. Yeah.
So the advice to the New Zealand government should really be to stop the poisoning and turn New Zealand into an incubator for science on water memory so that we can heal the world for free.
I think absolutely. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting a Maori chief when I was there, and he took me, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. He took me to a river and then took me to the source of water. And there was a well, and the water was I should say, a spring, and the water was welling up. And I looked at that water; it looked so pure and so wonderful. And to think of pure water that's coming from the bowels of the earth being tainted in such a way.
With the world's most toxic, lethal, sterility drug, basically. But it triggers unimaginable agony and disease. And, this month, so I was in court since May trying to stop the government and from doing the poison drops this year, and they've just spread enough poison of monofluoroacetate alone at 30 grams a kg of the poison pellet, capable to kill but 122 million people at 6 kgs per hectare over the land mass they've spread it over, or if it's only 2 kgs per hectare, which is the old volume, capable to kill 41 million people. Now, that's just been spread right across our natural forests and our natural waterways that lead into the agriculture, troughs, the livestock troughs, and the human water supply. And the government's telling everyone that's safe. Enough poison to kill between 41 million people and 122 million people. We only have a population of 48 million people. Now, mass quantities of that are in the water, because it appears when people go into the bush after these drops that the waterways really look like a primary target. There's just massive of these poison pellets in the waterways. So what would your opinion be on that?
Well, to stop. I know there must be economic forces that are driving this, but from outside New Zealand, most of us think of New Zealand as a uniquely pure place where the water is pure, the people are pure, even the government is pure.
No, that one you should challenge that assumption. Government, not pure.
I'm just telling you from a distance. We sometimes think of, if things get too bad, where we're going to move to, and the first place that comes, of course, for us is Canada, because nearby. The second place is always New Zealand, because of the anticipated purity of the place, and
because of the brilliant branding that we're 100% pure, when we have absolutely toxified most of our waters, rivers and streams, and now our oceans have toxic algae, so you can't swim in our rivers and streams and lakes anymore. It's
terrible. I know someone who's dealing with that. There's a colleague, his name is Bob Greer.
Okay.
You probably don't know him. Greer.
Okay.
Bob Greer. I can connect you if you like. And he's got a device, and I saw it operating. It uses some frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies, and he's been really successful at taking pollutants from water and clearing the water. He's someone you'd be interested in chatting with him.
Yeah.
And if you want offline, I can send you his contact information, because you probably won't find him online. He's someone to look toward. He knows a lot about water and is seriously interested also in what interests you and what should interest everybody, not only in New Zealand, but everywhere. So,
because I've argued to the court that this should be absolutely shut down. This program should be shut down, and that we should go into an immediate remediation program. I've had my High Court hearing for 3 hours, and the International Criminal Court accepted the argument for review on July 23rd. So they are simultaneously looking at this. They only take jurisdiction when the national judicial system fails, which to date, across multiple applications to the court, the national judicial system has failed. But I'm a bit cheeky, but I argue two reasons. One is either they actually believe the government propaganda and can't accept the new science, which is why I'm really focused on this next hearing to make them understand the frontier of science is about water for this century. And with so much unknown, as you've said, they need to stop this program and look at remediating what we know to be our water across the country to be completely sick right now. It's so toxic, and that is arguably because we're spreading tons of poison. But somehow they've managed to, through the media, they've managed to disconnect the cause and effect. So they talk about the diseases. They're pre-promoting Legionnaire's disease. Now that's a toxic form of pneumonia that you get through poisoned water with 1080, but it's not connected. Right? Everyone's going to get Legionnaire's disease in this country this summer. That's being promoted through our media, but they're not connecting that to the fact that in the last month they've just dumped enough toxic poison to cause those symptoms right through our riverbed. And so the key challenge that we have in New Zealand, and arguably with the International Criminal Court, is to get them to understand that this is the frontier of science for our century, and the science currently, it is proven that water has intelligence, consciousness, memory, and that it is crucial to our life force. And it is so delicate that, as you said, your experiment was that the poison reduced the easy water, the fourth phase water, which is the structured water that keeps everything living, to the point where the cells die. So with that knowledge, because how many papers have you written on your experiments and evidence?
I don't count.
Okay.
But on this particular experiment, probably 30 or so.
Yeah. And
Book.
so we can categorically say that poison should not be put in water.
Yeah, I mean, it seems self-evident that poison should not be put in water. I mean, it's unimaginable for me how anybody could doubt that.
I know. Well,
And you
welcome
know,
to New Zealand. Pure poison, 100%
well,
pure poison.
yeah, if you look at the incidence of chronic pollution, if you look at the incidence of chronic disease and plot it as a function of time, it's a graph that looks like this, and the chronic diseases are increasing rapidly. And if you plot on the same set of axes the number of pollutants or the amount of pollutants that are in our environment, it follows the same curve.
So what you're saying is it's reasonable to assume that the effect of this poison on water will cause death?
Well, I don't know. I have not done research myself to conclude that, but I would certainly go as far as saying that the evidence that the rate of increase of chronic disease matching the rate of increase of pollutants in the environment is certainly suggestive that this is a big problem, that the cause of these chronic diseases, I mean, we're talking about diabetes and obesity and cancer and autism and all these, they're increasing rapidly. And my colleague, Stephanie Seneff, as I mentioned to you, I can't remember exactly, but I think she plotted the rate of increase of autism. And it concludes, maybe you've seen this, something like by 2025, something like half of newborn boys especially will be autistic. Can you believe?
Yeah, and I've read a lot of information on that, that some of the best science on autism is also the fact that when the vaccinations happen, the gut, because of these poisons, the gut is changed. So the vaccinations with the changed bacteria in the gut cause the autism.
I've heard something similar from people who are studying that and people who know. It's really scary. Our world is getting sicker and sicker, and I think it may be not only the pollution, but also the electromagnetic smog that we have from all of the stuff that we're using, as we're using right now. The two of them also is an issue that we need to contend with. But
because the other thing that
absolutely no, I mean poisons in water. I just can't conceive of a good argument for this.
There's no argument to support it, and it's irrational for the government to say that it's safe. That the Prime Minister gives interviews on national radio saying once there's 1080 poison in the water, that the plant, which the plants absorb that, the plants like puha, which is a primary moldy food, that it's perfectly safe. That drinking water, they've got people at the moment going to the poisoned rivers and drinking water and saying it's perfectly safe.
Oh, well, it's not perfectly safe. All the evidence we have is that it's a complete and absolute mistake to throw poisons in water. The research is absolutely necessary, and until and if the research shows that it's irrelevant, we shouldn't do it because it's an experiment whose outcome we don't know.
And what would your hypothesis be if you put enough poison per annum in the living water ecosystem of the natural bush that flows into the town and water supply and the livestock water supply? What would your hypothesis be of doing that in quantities capable to kill between 41 million people and 122 million people in a country like New Zealand? What would you expect the outcome to be within the next 5 or 10 years doing that repeatedly?
Well, I don't want to profess anything beyond what I know and can hypothesize about. It would be easy for me to say, well, of course you're right, and you probably are right. If I were in charge, there was no way that I would allow this to happen. It's just too risky an outcome. I think there are going to be more chronic illnesses, more deaths. It's not going to be a pretty picture.
Yeah. And then, according to some of your incredible work, which you told me earlier that you are about to publish in your upcoming book, there's broader consequences to consider, that when you're changing the structure of this water, it could in fact change the energy that is arguably required to make the Earth spin.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is going 3 or 4 steps beyond where we are. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
I think it's logical that the turning of the Earth is powered by something, and I could adduce the evidence for the fact that the turning of the Earth is actually driven in some way by water. It would be hard for me to explain it without going into a few steps. But there's so much about water and nature that we're now beginning to understand. And
exactly.
if I have one suggestion for anybody, the recent book called The Fourth Phase of Water has actually become pretty popular, and there's a lot in it. And if you really want to think about water and want to think about water in the body and water in health, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, but the reason I bring that up, and I know that's a big leap, people would really need to go and watch a video on one of your long form talks on explaining that theory. But the importance of it is that there is so much about water that we don't yet understand, and so much information indicates that it is what we know anyway, the most important life force on the planet, but perhaps more important than we've ever imagined, and more powerful and capable than we've ever imagined.
Totally, yeah. Years ago, some people knew that water was central for life. It was the great Nobel laureate Albert St. George, who was almost everybody's hero, who knew about the centrality of water. He discovered vitamin C and many other things, and he said, life is water dancing to the tune of solids. And it's beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that water is so central and so important. So yeah, and now people are coming to realize, but it wasn't completely lost to people years ago. It's just that we've forgotten about it. Modern biology takes apart cells and takes apart molecules and looks now at submolecular components using fancy equipment, and there's a lot of information that comes about. But they I think have lost sight of the fact that when you put it all together into a whole, the water is the matrix and the binding factor for everything that you have. It's so central to all, and you have to pay attention to it. The last thing you want to do is to impact and destroy the purity of that water.
Yeah, it's absolutely sacred to life. It should be protected at all costs.
Sacred, totally sacred.
Yeah, and because, I'd like, I can't prove this scientifically, but I'd like to argue that if water has an opinion, with some experimenters it works, with some people it won't work, with the US Defense Force it refused to work. I think that's a good opinion. I think the water's quite intelligent. I think we should give it more credit.
Well, we might want to pay more attention to the experiments of Masaru Emoto. I don't know if you're familiar.
I love their work.
Yeah, the scientists mostly don't take it seriously because the experiments or the results weren't done completely objectively. But it appears that you can actually send your thoughts or convey your thoughts to the water, and the water will change in some way as the water turns into ice. It shows different structures, and although scientists dismiss this as utter nonsense, a colleague of mine has actually taken up and done a study, an objective study, put an audience in front of various slides that they show and asked the audience so which one has good information, which is bad information. And the results showed that what Emoto has done is really proven scientifically that the positive information causes beautiful structures, and the negative information causes ugly structures. So a lot of people are doing this, are taking this up, and you mentioned a scientist earlier. Actually, it was I think a German scientist who did it, who looked at, put some droplets of water and had them dry, and had different people hold them, focus their intention, and each one dried differently. One person who was doing it produced droplets consistently of the same shape, dried droplets, and another one consistently showing a different shape. So some information different for each of the people conveyed different information to the water. I mean, these are just touches scratches the surface of the different kinds of experiments that show water structure and water information.
Yeah.
So it's all over, and it's increasing rapidly. I mean, the interest in this. New
Yeah.
Zealand, I haven't seen too much of it.
No, and that's just it. Like, I mean, if you were being very nice, you would say that they are working off out-of-date science and it's a mistake. But, you know, it's not, because I've been in court arguing the science all year, trying to stop them, and they drive it forward anyway. So, you know, I'm fairly sure there's intent to poison with intent to kill going on, and that's certainly what the International Criminal Court are reviewing. But also, obviously, the very obvious and pertinent outcome is that if you spread tons and tons of toxic poison all over the forest ecosystems and watersheds, then you are artificially causing the sixth extinction, because this kills everything from the insects to the animals to the microorganisms in the soil, and completely geoengineers the water, which goes into every other living being to keep it alive.
Yeah, you're right on. You've described it perfectly well, better than I can describe it. Yeah.
And so effectively what you are doing, which is incredibly important for the world to understand right now, is you are artificially, chemically inflicting climate change.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could put it that way. It's a step between easy water, structured water, putting poisons in, to changing the climate, but there certainly is a linkage, because, you know, the clouds are made of water, and if you've poisoned the water, the clouds will contain some of that information, and that information is dropped on the earth. And
so then the rainwater that people are gathering would be affected with that same information of poison.
I would certainly think so. Yeah. I don't know who has studied that, but it would certainly be appropriate to study it. Totally.
So tell me, what's the future for easy water? Where are you taking the fact that you've discovered this fourth phase of water, where it's highly intelligent, structured, conscious water with a purpose of, for example, helping the muscles contract or keeping the cells alive? What's the vision for your work? Where does this go next?
I'd like to, you know, we deal mostly in fundamental science and less in applications. We want to find out or understand the fundamentals. And so what interests me as a scientist the most is understanding the exact mechanism by which the information is imparted and stored in the water. Okay. And we're doing experiments to try to figure this out. It's not trivial to do this. It's frontier stuff, but more and more people are getting interested. I would like to know how, exactly how, not just a broad brush statement, but I'd like to know on a molecular scale what exactly is happening. You know,
what if that required you to know God?
Well, I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but you know, maybe beyond my lifetime. This is the frontier, because water is central to everything in our life. And the information in water is absolutely central. We need to understand it. We need desperately to understand it. And I can't say in any stronger terms, but it's really wrong to dump stuff in the water and think it has no consequence.
The problem I'm having is that it's criminal, and I've got 2 cases in the New Zealand court, criminal and civil, and I've been able to get my civil case advanced. You know, I've got an injunction hearing coming up to stop this completely, pending my appeal hearing, most likely in November. My deadline's the 24th of this month, which is, you know, partly why we're doing this video. So thank you. But you know, it's the criminal claim has been incredibly difficult to get through the system, because, you know, and that's why the International Criminal Court matters, because they take the jurisdiction on a case when the national system is unable or unwilling to investigate or prosecute. But mass poisoning of water with the world's most lethal chemical, and mass torture, you know, when they spread this, it tortures everything to death across our forest by many days of death. It's a hideous apocalyptic sort of scene of screaming keas and pigs and possums and rats and stoats, but all of the insects. It's devastating. And so this mass animal torture is happening right across our country with tons and tons of torture poison that is then going into our water. And people for years in New Zealand, now we've just massively increased the quantities. The new budget this year for this poisoning is $436 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
My goodness. My goodness.
But people have been counting how many tortured animals there are and not realizing, because the government says it's perfectly safe in the water and it dilutes and it's gone, and then they can't test for 1080. But of course, it's metabolized into the fluorocitrate molecule, so it's changed form. It's no longer 1080. And as per your work and Luc Montanet's work, it literally restructures the frequency of the water.
Yep, it does. And I have to sign off because we have some guests, but let me just say that, if I can be of help before the court in some other way, international court, I would be most happy to do so. Because this is so important.
This is so important, because also the problem is that we export our product to the world and our water to the world.
Yeah,
and there's only 2 forests in our country that have not been poisoned repeatedly.
Terrible. It's awful.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Miriam, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck to you. I hope you succeed because this is so important.
Yeah.
Let's be in touch, okay?
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Gerald.
Take care, sure. My pleasure. Okay, bye-bye.